So you know how not wanting to discriminate based on race is the new racism, and how being against beating the absolute shit out of people who disagree with you is the new fascism. Well, now being not fond of complete and utter ideologues makes you an ideologue. This according to The Guardian's finest writer, Owen Jones, in his article, Centrists Attack the Left, but they are the true ideologues. He starts off by saying, if a new so-called centrist party is to be set up, why not call it denial or perhaps hubris? Self-described centrists believe that they are the besieged remnants of a political sanity in a world gone mad. To be a centralist, so the story goes, is to be above ideology, pragmatic, focused on what works, being grown up. They are the moderate stabilizers, or according to this narrative, it is their marginalization that has opened the way to extremes. In the centrist worldview, the xenophobic, racist, or indeed fascist right wing are deemed to be politically a moral equivalent of the radical left. Only one paragraph in, and he already shows that he doesn't know what he's talking about. I mean, first of all, when their cult leader believes that Castro is a champion of socialist justice and Venezuela is this socially utopian that we should be striving to become, are you sure denial's a word you really want to be throwing around? And at this point, it's more about fighting back against what we know doesn't work. We know that your identity politics doesn't work. We know that your collectivism doesn't work. We know that National Socialism doesn't work. And every single time that a socialist experiment has been tried out based on Marxist principle, it's always ended in failure. Yet you keep on persisting that we try it out. And yes, the radical right and the radical left are moral equivalencies, because in many ways you're exactly the same. You're both obsessed with identity politics, you both have an attitude of no bad tactics, just bad targets, and you're both intolerant of other people's views. And if either one of you were to get into power, us liberals, which is what you really mean by centrists, would be fucked. We would be absolutely fucked if either one of you got into power. Last November, the comedian Trevor Noah warned anti-Trump protesters not to become the hate that you're protesting against, as though anti-Muslim hatred and the passionate repudiation of it was somehow morally comparable. The thing is, the alt-left, if that's what you want to call it, don't make a distinction between those that are critical of Islam, those that are bringing up genuinely concerns within the Islamic community, and those who just outright hate all Muslims. Most liberals just want to be able to criticise Islam without being called a bigot. I mean, we've been doing this for Christianity for years and that wasn't a problem. And then on the other side of it, the person that you would have running the country would let former ISIS fighters back into the country. Groups that have been throwing gays off roofs, beheading people, actually oppressing women. But yet, because we want to criticise some medieval religious text, we're the bigots. It's insane. As the Anti-Defamation League put it, the word alt-left was created to create a false equivalency between the far right and anything vaguely left, seemingly that they didn't like. It did not rise organically, and it refers to no actual group or movement or network. But lo, the alt-left boogeyman of the self-described centralist has been appropriated by Donald Trump to apologise for his shield and legitimization of fascists and Nazis. I mean, the people who decided that Pepe, a literal cartoon frog, a legitimate meme, is a hate symbol. I mean, they couldn't have any motive behind this statement, could they? I mean, they couldn't have an agenda or a side. I mean, they're not biased at all. And I hate to break it to you, but it kind of does refer to some certain groups. You know, for example, Antifa, by any means necessary. Pretty much all communist activist groups. But here's the thing though, like him or not, Trump has condemned those who follow an ideology that has been responsible for millions of deaths. On the other side, Jeremy Corbyn joins rallies with people who follow an ideology that have been responsible for even more millions of deaths. Centrist is a misleading term which should be abandoned. Though viable alternative is lacking, bearers of the centrist flame regard neoliberals or Blairites as abusive rather than descriptive terms. Centrism implies non-ideological moderation, and given left and right are meaningless abstract terms for most people, it is a seductive label. No, a term isn't lacking. We're left-leaning liberals, or at least most of us are left-leaning liberals. Some of us are right-leaning liberals. But let's face it, the biggest problem here is that we're right of view, which in short just translates to we're not communists or socialists. And a Blairite is someone who supported Blair, and as you quite like to point out every single time it's brought up how the Labour Party has fucked up and screwed over the working classes in the past, he was closer to a Tory than anything, so what's that got to do with us liberals? And no, we don't like the term neoliberals because we're closer to classical liberals. And as far as I'm aware, neoliberals is actually an American term that refers to people like you, socialists, masquerading as liberals. But centrists aren't pragmatists. They're ideologues, extolling a blend of market liberalism, social liberalism, and more often than not, a hawkish military posture. Claims of modernisation in a British context do not readily sit with the helping to unleash the murderous, never-ending bloody chaos in Iraq and Libya, it should be said. But it is the economic order centrists defend that produced the insecurity and stagnation which, in turn, laid the foundation for both the ascendancy of the left and its antithesis, the xenophobic right. No, we're not ideologues because we are willing to change our views based on evidence and arguments that other people present to us, hence why we're so open to free speech. But you don't provide arguments that are backed up by evidence or even logic, which is why you don't like free speech. And Owen, communism and socialism loses the battle when it's compared to the Nazis in terms of how many people it's killed. Do you really want to open that can of worms with what you identify as centralist? Because I promise you, you're gonna lose that one too, by a bigger margin. Now, the beginning of the Iraq War was before I really started getting into politics. I was only a young teenager at the time. But from my understanding of the Iraq War, wasn't that based on falsified information provided by the FBI that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction? And personally, I don't know a single liberal-minded person that was or is in favour of the Iraq War. But I think I know what's going on here. I think it's this simplistic nature of us versus them that we're seeing in Owen right now. I think it's a case of, well, if I believe in A, and they don't agree with me, they're not a socialist like me, then they must agree with B. Now, as part on economics, I can take one of two ways. Either A, he's criticising our defence of capitalism, in which case, yes, we do defend capitalism. And the reason for that is, capitalism is the best system we've ever had. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying it's perfect, but since the last 200 years since capitalism started to really get going, the quality of life for the working class has grown at such an extraordinary rate, whilst you want to implement a socialist system which has shown time and time again that is demonstrably worse for the working class. I can hear the cries already. To lump the Blair and Cameron era together is as inaccurate as it is offensive. No, it's not offensive, it's just stupid, and it's not really inaccurate either, it's just irrelevant. The conversation is about centralists, is about liberals. But when you talk about the Blair and Cameron era, you're talking essentially about Tory values. What's that got to do with centralists? What's that got to do with liberals, which is the conversation you started? I'll be honest, I think this is more to do with the simplistic view of politics at the moment, rather than dishonesty. I think it's more to do with an us versus them mentality. Because I don't think he can actually comprehend that sometimes there are some lapovers with ideas and opinions. Labour's progressive achievements, such as the minimum wage, public investment and LGBT rights, should both be defended and extended, but the failure of Labour's centrist to regulate the financial sector, to build the housing Britain needs, to adequately reverse social destruction of Thatcherism, all this sowed seeds of the coming cataclysm. 4 years before the crash, wages began to stagnate for the bottom half, for the bottom third, they began to decline, while it remained boom time for the Britain's triumphant elite. Well, I think it's finally clicked, and I can't believe it's taken me long to work that out, but I think he's using centralist as a catch-all term for anyone who's not socialist, but also for people who aren't alt-right. So, that's a big fucking group he's trying to catch with one term. But regardless, if we're just talking about the Blairite administration, there are some fair criticisms. For example, the housing in Britain, it was disastrously handled. However, do you know what's also not going to help the housing situation? Do you know what's going to add more pressure to it? Uncontrolled migration. I'm sorry, but that's just a fact. The more people we have in the country, the more pressure we are under to build more houses. And I agree with you that businesses do need to be regulated better. We need to close these loopholes that are letting big companies, such as Costa, get away with paying any tax almost. But you don't want to stop there. For example, Corbyn wants to increase the percentage of tax that those in the highest brackets have to pay. And those in the highest bracket are anyway from 80,000 to multi-millionaires. I mean, that's insane that they're in the same bracket. But on top of that, you also want to tax the fuck out of them in other areas of life, such as private school. But here's the thing. If the people with the money aren't doing well, they're not going to be starting up businesses. And if people don't start up businesses, the working class don't have jobs. What we need to be doing, which I don't think we're doing enough of now, is in making sure that the big companies, the massive businesses, pay their fair share of tax and encourage little businesses to grow. At least from what I've researched in terms of economics, that's what I feel we need to be doing. Despite the shameful, unchallenged later revision of history, the Tories backed every penny of the Labour spending until the financial calamity. But then came the Osborne, Cameron, Clegg era of austerity. While Labour centrists demanded the party committed to cuts in the name of fiscal credibility, Ed Miliband recognised that the consensus was no longer viable, even if he was unable to definitely break from it. The centrists loathe and fear Corbynism, but they were its midwives. Similarly, without toxic fusion of economic security and xenophobic scapegoating, right-wing populism would have remained confined to the online rants of frothing keyboard warriors. Again, you're talking about Tories. You are quite literally talking about Tories now. What has this got to do with centralists? What is striking about these so-called centralists is they offer very little evidence of self-reflection about their plight. Their decline isn't due to their own failures, but the irrational madness of others. They are the grown-ups and infants on sugar-high populism having taken over. Hillary Clinton lost to a candidate widely dismissed as less likely to win the president than an asteroid crashing to Earth. But no blame was attributed to her political outlook. It was all Russian intervention and misogyny and nothing else. What the fuck are you talking about? Us centralists, aka liberals, have been saying since day one that the reason Trump won was because of Hillary's politics. Because of what she was saying, because of the complete shit that's coming out of the media's mouths. It was your side that was saying it was because of Russian intervention. It was your side that was shouting around claims of misogyny and racism. Jesus fucking Christ. In Britain, there is a growing chatter about a new centrist party. This at a time when more than 80% of the electorate voted for a left-led Labour government or Brexiteer Tories, the two parties' highest combined share of the vote for nearly half a century in an election in which anti-Brexit centrist Liberal Democrats flopped. Well, first of all, Brexit wasn't a left and right wing issue. For the most part, it was a class issue. And most of the working class who you say you represent, that you want to represent, voted in favour of Brexit. But when that happens, you just go, oh, they're racist, they're xenophobic. You dismiss their concerns. Secondly, yes, the Liberal Democrats were shit. Because, ironically, even though they're called the Liberal Democrats, They wanted to overturn a democratic result, a democratic choice, which is the anti-liberal thing to do. I think one of the biggest problems was, from what I got when I was talking to liberals and centralists, was that they didn't get offered any option that they wanted. I mean, that's certainly how I felt. I didn't want to vote for fucking the Tories. I didn't want to vote for May. I think she's a vile woman. And not only that, I think she's a bad political leader. But at the same time, I wanted Brexit. Even before I was on board with Brexit, because originally I voted against it. It was a democratic decision that we had to go for. But we didn't get that option of a hard Brexit left by the left wing. Which is why, maybe not necessarily enough to win an election, but I think there's definitely a sizable bulk to justify starting an actual liberal party. It is revealing that the disgruntled centralist offers virtually no clues about their vision other than imposing Brexit. Like, hang on, who do you think these centrists are? Because you haven't made that clear, because you've conflated it with left-wingers that aren't socialist, with liberals, and even with some Tory sympathisers, I suppose would be the best way to describe them. Now, the Tories and a lot of even liberals voted in favour of Brexit. I mean, again, I can't believe I have to say this, but a Brexit wasn't a left-wing, right-wing decision. So, who do you think the centrists are? Because you haven't described that very well. The Remain cause is a political life raft. It allows them to present an image of political insurgents, of radicalism, rebellion even. Because Labour has pledged to honour the referendum result, they can promote the fiction of that Corbynism and right-wing Toryism are unified cabal leading Britain to national ruin. Those who voted for Remain but feel it is politically impossible to overturn Brexit are portrayed as traitors. See, now you're literally just talking about the Liberal Democratic Party. Owen, you don't seem sure in your own definition of what you think a centralist is, because you keep on changing it and referring to different groups throughout this article. Essentially, like I've said before, those that aren't socialist but also aren't quite alt-right. It is a convenient crutch to conceal their lack of answers to any of the insecurities and injustices that led to their downfall in the first place. Will they raise the taxes on the rich and major corporations to end cuts? Will they abolish the burdens of student debt? Will utilities be brought to the public ownership? What evidence is there that they want any other thing than a return to the world of existed until 2015? A world that they thought would last forever until its dramatic implosion? Going off the idea that he's still talking about the Liberal Democratic Party, at least in this paragraph, before he changes it again, when were they ever on top? Were they on top to have a downfall in the first place? I mean, the only difference really was that before 2015, we didn't have as much of this batshit crazy nonsense as we do now. We didn't have the radical left. At least it wasn't as prominent. And I'll be honest, I don't think you fully understand the consequences of the things you're asking for. If you just raise taxes on major corporations, all you're going to do is make it difficult for smaller corporations to grow, to get to that major corporation status. That doesn't solve the problem of closing the loopholes. Also, if you overtax the rich, they're just going to get up and take their money with them. They're going to leave the country with their money. Yes, we can get rid of the burden of student debt, but that will come at a cost. There will be less courses available, less people will be able to go on to those courses, and all this fucking gender studies sociology bollocks, which is where you get the majority of your sport, will be cut. And in terms of utilities being publicly owned, I don't actually know enough about it, so I'm not going to put my opinion on record. The traditional centrist character of the left wing was this: we blamed our political marginalisation on the false consciousness of the masses. Hang on, that's a Marxist principle. I learned that in sociology when I did A-levels. So you can't claim that anyone on the left that follows Marxist principle doesn't think that. We are dogmatic and purist, obsessed with the past, unwilling to compromise, and we are more interested in looking for traitors rather than converts. Well, are you not purists? I mean, you're not purists in the same way as the Nazis or the white supremacists in terms of obsessed with race. But you've shown in this article that you, with this with us or against us attitude, that you are purist. That you just have purist thoughts. That's what it is. And yes, you are obsessed with the past. In fact, most of your arguments are grounded in history. They have some form of historical root, regardless of whether they're relevant today or not. And give me an example of where you're willing to compromise, to make that unwilling to compromise statement untrue. Because you're not even really willing to listen to the other side. You're not even willing to acknowledge the actual legitimate concerns of people who you disagree with. So you can't say that you're willing to compromise because you're not even fucking willing to listen to them. Does this not increasingly resemble the outlook of many of today's self-described centralists? No, it doesn't. Because we're not concerned about purity of thought. We're willing to talk to people with lots of different opinions. So you can't say we're puritists. Also, at least in my case anyway, when I talk about communism and socialism and the amounts killed by that philosophy, a Marxist philosophy, that's in response to you calling people Nazis. And in terms of looking for traitors rather than convert people to our way of thinking, if that's the way you want to put it, which sounds a bit cult-like to me, but never mind. We're not the ones that dox people for having the wrong opinions. We're not the ones that morally grandstand over people. I mean, not too long ago, weren't the regressive lefties attacking you for suggesting Corbyn should step down from leadership? I mean, it's completely insane because your lack of self-awareness is amazing. You've perfectly described yourself without realising it. Would it not be worthwhile holding a post-mortem that examines their own failures instead of blaming their weak political position on an electorate succumbing to unreasonable populism? I mean, this is amazing. I mean, this is written as if the socialists won the last election, as if Corbyn won the election. You didn't. The only thing I can think is that the reason he's portraying the situation as it is because he's trying to get people to pick a side. He's trying to get the centralists to pick a side. Again, you're either with us or against us. I think that's generally what this article's about. Would it not make sense to debate answers to the insecurities and injustice that led to Britain to a political moment which is a source of such despair for centrists? It is my own view that centrism has no answer, and that if the left fails, the vacuum will be filled by populist, hateful right. I called it, and I promise you I did not look ahead. It was the extremists of the economic order that centrists defended, not its modernisation, that led Britain here. Centrists will dispute this, and find it almost inconceivable that they have put us into this political wilderness once inhabited by the left. But until they come to terms with their own failures, they will never surely rule it again. Oh, look at this. The Guardian's having to beg for money at the end. With writing like this, I can't understand why. I think I'm going to leave it here for today. If you've lasted this long, thank you very much. Like, share, subscribe, and I shall see you next time.